situation which we most commonly come across. This time again, the mounted knights have managed to break the foot unit. This time it's a foot unit without any line of battle. So the foot unit has failed its break test and must flee. At this point, the mounted unit must declare whether they wish to pursue or whether they wish to hold. If they wish to hold, then they must pass a cohesion test to do so. If they fail the cohesion test, then they have to pursue. In this case, we'll assume that they have taken the option to pursue. The infantry roll 2d6 because their base movement is 12 or less, and the cavalry, open order, they're going to roll 3d6. The infantry roll an 8, the cavalry roll a 15. Now, the pursuers must roll higher than the fleeing troops in order to run them down. So in this case, the infantry get caught and the cavalry would move their full 15-inch distance. Let's say that the infantry had a really good roll. They rolled 11, and the cavalry, they didn't do so well and they only rolled 8. Then the infantry would get away, but next turn, because the infantry are still within the charge distance of the pursuers have to declare a charge on the fleeing unit, because the fleeing unit have not outdistanced their pursuers. Therefore, the mounted unit must declare on the fleers. If by some miraculous chance, let's say it's the other way around, and the infantry were pursuing the cavalry, and the cavalry managed to outdistance the pursuing infantry, so they were outside of their charge range, then the infantry is not obliged to charge the fleeing cavalry. The only other thing to remember about flee and pursuit is that following a combat, pursuers become disorganized. So not only is it the fleeing unit which loses its cohesion and its order, I should say, not its cohesion, the pursuing unit becomes disorganized. Hence, if they pursued into fresh troops, so say we had a situation something like this, where they pursued into fresh troops, then in the combat they would count as being disorganized. Here's another thing that's worth mentioning, Nick, and that is the effect of terrain on flee and pursuit. Here we have a situation where the cavalry have managed to get round behind the infantry and have declared a charge on them. The infantry have failed their cohesion test for being charged in the flank or the rear and must flee. They roll 2d6. Now, because they're fleeing, their move is not slowed by any terrain. So the infantry would be able to flee across the terrain. However, the cavalry would be a failed charge, but any pursuit move across terrain would be slowed by that terrain. So that's an instance where fleers can get away from pursuers. Another situation with flee and pursuit, Nick, is where the fleeing unit encounters friends to its rear. In this case, cavalry have broken and must flee. The flee move is always straight back. In this case, it will bring them into contact with friends. If the fleeing unit's frontage is greater than that of their friends, then they're assumed to flow round the unit, assuming they've got the movement to do so. If it was the other way round, and they encountered a unit of friendly troops of an equal or greater frontage, then they would attempt to break through them. So here the infantry frontage is less than the intervening friends. So the dice they rolled for their flee would have to be sufficient to carry them through the unit. So they'd have to roll a pretty high number to clear this unit. If they can't, if whatever they rolled would mean that the troops would end up in the middle of the unit, then unfortunately they halt at the front of their friends, and then they would be most likely be destroyed. Normally the flee move would be directly away from the pursuers, but if you were engaged to the front and to the flank and you broke, then you'd flee in a 45-degree direction. The pursuers would both roll their pursuit dice, and you'd move the unit which scored the highest number first. If the infantry unit were unlucky that they were engaged to both front and rear and broke, then there's no room for them to flee. They don't flee from the sides, they're just automatically destroyed. Likewise, if this infantry unit was forced to flee and they encountered enemy troops in their path, then they would be destroyed. There must be a minimum gap of 80mm for a fleeing unit to pass through and not be destroyed if it comes across impassable terrain or an enemy unit. Another point I'll cover is pursuit into fresh enemy. So here we have a skirmisher combat. This unit of skirmisher breaks and is forced to flee. They roll well and have the distance to flow round their intervening friends. These skirmishers pursue, assuming they rolled enough to take them into contact with the formed unit. Because they're skirmishers, they may choose to stop 2 inches away. Remember, skirmish troops cannot charge formed troops. Here we have a combat, 2 cavalry units. One of the cavalry units gets broken and flees. The pursuit move would take this cavalry unit into contact with new enemy. The pursuing unit counts as charging, and would receive all the benefits in the ensuing combat in the next turn. The fresh enemy, their only action is to hold. If this was a skirmish unit, then they could have evaded, but because it's a formed unit, their only option is to hold. The final situation I'll cover is that if a flee and pursuit, if a unit fled off table and the pursuing unit also went off table, then the pursuing unit must spend one turn off the table. The next turn, it must pass a cohesion test in order to return to the table. This is done in the initial phase of the turn sequence. It gets 2 opportunities to do that, two turns to do that. If it fails, then it's lost for the rest of the game. However, it wouldn't count towards your army breakpoint calculation. If it's successful and it passes its cohesion test and it manages to return, then it can return to the board anywhere within a normal move of where it exited the table. It returns in the remaining moves phase, so it couldn't declare a charge, but otherwise it may move as normal. I think that's about it. I think the only other situation which might arise, and it's rare but it can happen, is that if you we can get an overrun where if a unit charges and you manage to kill all your opponents in the first round of combat, you can make an overrun rule. So I mean, it's very rare that it happens, but let's say, for the sake of argument, that this infantry unit caught an unformed cavalry unit. They managed to inflict 4 casualties and destroyed the unit. Had the infantry unit charged, then it will be able to make a overrun movement. Same way as a pursuit move, and follows all the rules for pursuit. The unit moves forwards in a direct line, continuing the path of its charge through where the enemy was. So, you know, that might bring it into contact with fresh troops. Chances are it just moves them a little bit forward. It's very rare that it happens, but it can happen. What you should note is that overrun does not apply if you ran down evading troops. So say we had a unit here where the skirmishers got a little bit too close to the infantry. Infantry declare a charge on the skirmishers. Skirmishers have to evade. They roll poorly. They don't get away from the charge. They're destroyed in the combat phase. But the infantry do not get to do an overrun move because these were troops that evaded from the charge. Okay, I think that just about covers what we need to know on flee and pursuit. Hopefully that's useful, Nick. Take care.